Did the video play through?
Okay, I'm starting right.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, from around the world, I'm sure. But welcome to this session 4 of our International Leadership Conference here in August. You saw we had a full plate. We've had some fantastic discussions on the Bering Strait and other issues. Today, and actually the focus or the title of our conference is Connecting the World's Economics, Perspectives, and Geography. And of course, we're focusing on North and South Korea. My name is Alan Jessen. I'm the North American Coordinator for the International Association for Peace and Economic Development. This session, and I think it fits in tremendously with the idea of economics and geography, but we're going to begin with a question as kind of a title here for today. Will differing economic interests in the Indo-Pacific region aid or hinder progress toward a reunification of the Korean Peninsula? So that's our mission and our job today. Let me bring up our 3 panelists, and I'll introduce you to them, let you welcome them. I'll introduce more, specifically before each speaks. But and let me just lay a little groundwork here for our discussion today. We have Dr. Franco Famularo, we have Ms. Purnima Voria, and Ms. Shihoko Goto. But the Indo-Pacific region covers a vast area with many cultures, nations, and economic realities. 3 of the top 10 regional trading blocs and intergovernmental organizations are located in this region. We have the ASEAN Economic Community, hope I pronounced that right, AEC, and the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, which was called APEC, and the Indian Ocean Rim Association, the IORA. The Republic of Korea, as far as I know, is a member of APEC, but not of the others. It's an interesting fact there. In addition to there is the Quad Security Alliance, which in the region that's been kind of reactivated in the last few years, I believe to counter China's military and economic belligerence, and including its near domination of rare earth materials. So today, this program will examine some of the current status of these regional economic forces and how that might affect hopes for progress toward peaceful reunification on the Korean Peninsula. For example, is there cohesiveness, sufficient cohesiveness to this region to reconcile nationalism with the common interests that nations have or should have, of course, for peace and stability? And then what role or what should the U.S. and or the Republic of Korea be doing to create some momentum for this reunification and how they can they interact with these regional blocks. So very good. I'm going to invite up our first speaker, Dr. Franco Famularo, and he is the president of the Universal Peace Federation in Canada. He serves as the chair of the Board of Trustees of the Unification Theological Seminary in New York City, and is the Canadian representative for the Sunhawk International History Institute. Dr. Famularo has engaged in peace activism with UPF and its affiliated organizations for over 45 years. Canada, Germany, and the United Kingdom, Korea, Russia, and the USA. That's a lot of countries, Dr. Famularo. So please welcome and please share with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Jessen, for the intro. Good afternoon to all of those here in North America. Good evening to everyone else, and good morning maybe to some. And I'd like to thank all the organizers at UPF for all their good work in planning and organizing this series of webinars on this important topic related to the reunification of the Korean Peninsula. Having visited Korea some 30 times over the past 35 years, that also included experiencing the tension at the border with North Korea, it is clear to me that Korea is an important vortex of global conflict that needs a solution. So we're tasked with the tall order of answering the question, will differing economic interests in the Indo-Pacific region aid or hinder progress toward the reunification of the Korean Peninsula? Now, I don't know if in this short time we can answer this question, but I'd like to start by sharing my screen with you so that you can have an idea of what we're talking about here. And I hope you can see that okay. This is the region of the world that we're looking at. It includes China, it includes India, Japan, Korea, the Philippines, Indonesia, some of the most populous countries in the world. Just China, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Bangladesh are massive in population, over 100, 200 million, over 1 billion. And the region comprises some 38 countries that share 44% of the world's surface area and 65% of the world's population, and account for 62% of the world's gross domestic product and 46% of the world's merchandise trade. Now, if you ask me, that's massive. You know, there are several economic unions in Asia. There's ASEAN, and I believe Alan referred to some. There are 10 member states that represent some 700 million people. Then there's something called the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which includes ASEAN plus 5 more countries. That is Australia, China, Japan, South Korea, and New Zealand. This agreement was ratified not so long ago in November 2020 and represents 30% of the world's population. It's the world's largest trade deal. There are many others. Trans-Pacific Partnership, because of the US withdrawal in 2018, it evolved into the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then you have APEC, and then you have IORA, the Indian Ocean Rim Association, and you have security alliances like Quad, where the US, India, Japan, and Australia are collaborating in security issues. India, I didn't see India as part of any of these economic blocs. However, India, which is a massive economy with a massive population, has bilateral agreements with ASEAN. It has bilateral agreements with Mercosur in South America, and with a long list of other countries. It's also in negotiations that are now stalled with the European Union, with Eurasia Economic Union, where they're negotiating. And again, looking at all this, we're asked, will the differing economic interests in the Indo-Pacific region aid or hinder progress toward reunification on the Korean Peninsula? Well, the short answer is it's complicated. There's no simple yes or no answer to this. The mutual benefit of each country is the key. And anyone that has been in business, as I have, knows that there are basic economic questions that we need to ask. If you go to any business course or economics 101, the three fundamental questions are, what should we produce? How should we produce it? And for whom should we produce? Now, Universal Peace Federation, as you know, is not a government. It's a non-governmental organization which pursues soft power track to diplomacy. Oftentimes, NGOs are not trusted because they deal with sticky issues like human rights. They deal with other sticky issues like the environment. And in some cases, governments don't like them. UPF's role is to actually bring people to the table. We are not a single issue NGO, but as you may have read from our literature, we have various pillars that we focus on. Relating with heads of state and government, both current and former, parliamentarians, religious leaders, academia, media, business world, arts and culture. We seek to find ways through which there can be increased dialogue that will lead to better cooperation between the different countries and the different factions involved in the global scene. And we see the importance of actually promoting core values, or what we call universally shared values. And there are 5 that we have distilled from our study of religion, philosophy, and other metaphysical studies that lead to an understanding that actually most of the world's peoples adhere to some form of religious tradition or some form of religious belief. It's only in the West, especially in Western Europe and North America, that there has been a tremendous decline in this area. But when you look at the entire world, 85% of the world's population adheres to some form of spiritual or religious practice. And so we've distilled these universally shared values, or our core values, to 5. Most people adhere to a belief in a higher being, an ultimate reality, or some people call that ultimate reality or higher being God, or Allah, or Yahweh, and many other names. That the highest values, secondly, are spiritual and moral. We understand, as a third point, the centrality of the family, and that the family is the school of love, but can also be the school of hatred, and that our efforts are to turn it into an area where people learn how to love and respect each other, which is the foundation for harmonious relations on a much broader level. Fourthly, that living for the sake of others or the greater good is the highest maxim. And fifth, that peace can only come through interdependence and mutual prosperity. So this relates to our theme today. You know, there are various common markets. For example, the European Union is one. The US-Canada Free Trade Agreement, first established based on the car industry in 1965, is another. We have the more recent version of the NAFTA, which the Americans called USMCA, or in Canada, where we call it CUSMA. This is an agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Well, probably the largest trading bloc in terms of economy in the world. Now, Europe and North America's success is due to a shared heritage. The Greco-Roman, Judeo-Christian heritage is prevalent in all of North America and in Western Europe, and the whole of Europe for that matter, where these trading blocs exist. There are certain things that we take for granted. Also, as Francis Fukuyama coined it, most countries in this zone are what we refer to as high trust societies, where you can write a check and trust that it will be valid. But this is not the case everywhere. You know, high trust society gives you the ability to form non-family, non-government organizations. And Fukuyama argued that the key to the formation of successful, large, modern business organizations has to do with this trust. So trust within an organization fosters cooperative work in teams and thus creative feedback and innovation. But what are the core values in Asia? We know it's a vast area where religious traditions like Hinduism, Confucianism, which is not really a religious tradition, but a way of life or an ethical tradition, a way of governance, Buddhism, and shamanism. There are many others. I won't mention them all here. What are the core values in Asia? There's discipline, frugality, educational achievement. We know this from the many Asian students and people from South Asia in our universities in North America. You know, my daughter and my son-in-law were telling me that in many of the institutions, a vast majority of the students in the sciences or engineering or medical school are generally from Asian or South Asian backgrounds. This testifies to this desire to achieve educationally. There's also a deference to authority in the East, which you won't find as prevalent here in the West, where we value our independence, our individuality, and our freedom. They have a sense to balance their individual and societal needs. Also, there's a value that is prevalent that many people refer to as collectivism, but that can be disputed. So, will the differing economic interests in the Indo-Pacific region aid or hinder progress toward reunification on the Korean Peninsula? Well, you know, the regional dynamics in the Asia-Pacific region are changing rapidly. As you know, China's Belt and Road Initiative has gained tremendous attention. And also the US's withdrawal from the TTP and other relations with Asia have actually influenced the situation. If India, South Korea, and China could enter the mega deal, which is called CPTPP, these three countries will benefit enormously. But ultimately, there has to be political will to impact not just economic cooperation in the area, but Korean unification. China's role is key, And we can't forget that, in fact, China is South Korea's largest trading partner. It does 25% of its total exports with China. And after the US, which is at 13%, basically half of the trading that it does with China, Vietnam and Japan are the other main trading partners of South Korea. And North Korea is almost completely dependent on China, with 96% of its imports coming from China and 67% of its exports going to China. So current events in the region, such as what we've witnessed in Afghanistan in the last few days, are obviously of concern. So will the differing economic interests in the Indo-Pacific region aid or hinder progress toward reunification on the Korean Peninsula? I'd say there's a bit of both in this mix and in this salad. It's not an easy question. It's not something that we can deal with in just a short webinar like this. And I will defer to the other experts on this panel to help us answer this question. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Famularo. Excellent. You laid out the importance of values and the question that underlies that as well for achieving the goals. So our next speaker, let me bring up Ms. Purnima Voria. Ms. Voria is the founder and CEO of the National U.S.-India Chamber of Commerce, NUICC. It's an international organization that promotes bilateral trade between the United States and India. Ms. Voria is an international business advocate, a motivational speaker, and U.S.-India expert. She was appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Gary Locke, as a national advisor to the Minority Business Development Agency. Kudos to that. She was awarded a Congressional Medal of Distinction for her outstanding leadership in business and her contribution to the United States economy. In 2005, the Wall Street Journal honored Ms. Voria as a Businesswoman of the Year. And two more recognitions here. In 2017, she was invited by the U.S. State Department to join Ivanka Trump at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in Hyderabad, India. And in 2018, she served as opening speaker for the Commonwealth Games in Gold Coast, Australia, on trade and investments. So, Ms. Voria, thank you so much for coming with us and share with us your thoughts. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Namaste to everyone. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to IAED and Alan, all the leadership for this wonderful series of programs. Very important because without peace, you cannot do any business. The world will be at unrest. And we see that right now happening in Afghanistan. My heart goes out to everyone in Afghanistan today. May God keep them safe. And with that, I will say that I think it is fair to say that we see relationship continuing at a very high level, and India, of course, remains an increasingly important partner in all this. We are going to continue to pursue our global comprehensive strategic partnership with all concerned. And as you know, that we did have our secretary go to India and speak with our prime minister as well as our foreign minister and Secretary Blinken, who came back very successful with all those talks. But before I dive into it, I must acknowledge that India's absence is notable. And New Delhi has not been participating in peace talks involving the two Koreas, such as the six-party talks, while India increasingly heft in the world politics has resulted in an incremental widening of its sphere and interests and influence beyond. It seems very appropriate for a rising Asian power to involve itself in the resolution of Korean conflict. because without that, we cannot talk about Korea, because to me, Korea is North and South Korea. And it is time that we build bridges between the two globally so that we can all live in harmony. Now, we have all heard about the Quad countries last year. It was very much in the news. US, Japan, Australia, and India taking the leadership. But the global change has really set the needs for much more to happen, just not this with the 2 or 4 countries. There are 53 Commonwealth countries with common interests and strategic partnership when it comes to commerce. I think they should also be involved in this peace talks. National security and economic security is the reason why we were all talking about the Quad countries, because now it is not United States which is the most powerful. We see China's rise. We see many other countries rising to that level. And India is going to step up to the plate to lead the 21st century. So it becomes very important for us to start thinking about involving others in the Quad countries, because every country needs economic security as well as national security. So we will see more happening in this. And I just saw that in the chat, one of the people were talking about, was asking the speakers to talk about One Belt, One Road. We have all heard about it. Again, the brainchild of Chinese President Xi Jinping is an ambitious economic development and commercial project that focuses on improving connectivity and cooperation among multiple countries spread across the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe. So when we talk about One Belt, I think all the conversation, our previous speaker laid down such a good foundation for this webinar today, explaining to all of us in this August gathering how important global involvement is going to be in this. I want to share a little bit about the Secretary Blinken's visit to India, and they were talking about 3 things. One was the Quad countries and expansion of the Quad countries. Number 2, they were talking about COVID and related things. So all these partnerships that we talk about, multilateral security partnership is very important because, as we all know, China is becoming more and more powerful. I don't know how much accuracy is there in this, but I heard that they do have their own IMF, which really is a serious concern. And now security partnership, when in New Delhi top diplomats of India and United States pledged Wednesday to expand the multilateral security partnership, understanding the deepening of the ties between the 2 countries, concerned over China's growing influence in that. So China was definitely a part of that talk. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Indian Foreign Prime Minister Jaishankar met with the New Delhi and sought strengthen regional front against Beijing's assertiveness and in Indo-US Pacific. And also they discussed Afghanistan. Now, whatever they discussed before they could even implement, Afghanistan has dismantled in a very shocking, and it was very sudden to all of us, I believe. They also landed the country's help in fighting in the coronavirus and said the vaccine partnership is an effort to end pandemic. Blinken also announced 25 million fund to support India's COVID vaccination program. And we are seeing that United States have been very involved in helping many others. There are few relationships in this world that between US and India that are more vital than the other. And Blinken said that we are world's 2 leading democracies. Our diversity fuels the national strength. So you will see more and more the Quad countries leading this partnership, but definitely I heard about Nepal, Bangladesh, and neighboring countries to be part of that, because national security for any country is not their just own security, but all the bordering countries are very much involved in that. And some of these smaller countries don't have the strength, military strength, or the economic strength to go on. They have to latch on to the existing, more powerful countries. I would like to see North Korea and South Korea economic development ties to be strengthened. And I think India will participate, although South Korea, we have been doing business with South Korea more aggressively now than before. So it's very encouraging to see quota and all other efforts being placed. But I think North Korea, we need to be inclusive. And I think leaders need to take a serious look at North Korea as well. Blinken said, that military solution to the conflict in Afghanistan or any other country would turn a pariah straight. And if Taliban takes control by force, but again, we still have to continue to sustain the gains of Afghani people, support regional security. I think it's not just Afghanistan. This could happen to many other countries that have weakened security. So I think Quad countries are going to take a major role. I will let some time for question and answers. So I'll stop right here, unless Alan, you want me to touch upon anything.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll certainly circle back to some of those issues. Thank you for sharing about Secretary Blinken's visit to India. I'd like to bring up our next speaker. This will be Miss Shihoko Goto. And Ms. Goto is the Deputy Director for Geoeconomics and the Senior Northeast Asia Associate at the Wilson Center's Asia Program. She's a leading expert on economics and politics, Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, as well as US policy in the region. A seasoned journalist and analyst, she spent 10 years reporting from Tokyo and Washington for Dow Jones and UPI on the global economy, international trade, Asian markets, and politics. So, Ms. Goto, that's a lot of experience you have there. And you're diving into this large, vast topic we've laid out today. So please share with us your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan. And yes, this is a very large topic, and I'm very excited to be part of such a eminent panel. It's a hard act to follow, both Franco and Purnima, but I'll do my best. But before I really address the issue about economic strategy in the Indo-Pacific and its outlook, I think I would like to look back in order to look forward. So I'd like to look back, first of all, by focusing on what has united the Asian countries until quite recently. And that has really been on this commitment to economic growth and, above all, stability that really unites an incredibly disparate Asia. I think Franco has done an amazing job trying to lay out a lot of the issues that divide, but also some of the values that unite this region. And certainly at the crux of that has been this commitment, especially since World War II, to ensure that there is steady and stable growth, and growth from the grassroots level upwards. I think we're all familiar in this space about the so-called Asian tigers, which Japan had been at the forefront, but also we saw a lot of East Asian countries, including South Korea, as well as Singapore, China, Taiwan, although Taiwan is not a separate country, of course. And we've seen this model of growth that the Asian tigers have followed really succeed until about the mid-1990s. And since then, though, what we have seen is that a new model of growth that kind of does not follow in these footsteps or follow the guidelines established by the international liberal order, which the United States has, of course, been at the lead, we've seen an alternative vision, a successful vision actually implemented into action by China. Today, of course, China is essentially the regional economic as well as military hegemon. And at the same time, it has emerged as the single biggest trading partner for all Asian countries, with the sole exception of Afghanistan. And so we are at this point of two paths, really, of competing visions for growth. One is outlined, and the shorthand, I would say, is outlined by the so-called Indo-Pacific, and what the United States is now terming as the free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP. And China has its own vision, which part of that roadmap is, of course, One Belt, One Road, which is now called the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI. But what is not so clear, though, is for the middle powers. Middle powers includes Japan, South Korea, and I would actually go so far as to include India into this idea of the middle powers, because it is forced into the arena of great power competition, and both sides, both China and the United States, are really pushing for these countries to take sides. And for them, for these middle powers, however, it's less a clash of ideology. It's less a choosing between authoritarian rule and some of the benefits, as well as the many deep sacrifices that have to be made to be part of an authoritarian regime, versus democracy and some of the benefits, but also the downfalls of the democratic governments can provide. What unites Asia at the moment, the Asian middle powers, is this commitment or this desire for a path for stable growth. This doesn't necessarily mean status quo, because it is changing. The situation is rapidly changing, but what they want, above all else, is stability. And I think that's particularly true in the case of the Korean Peninsula. Of course, we see challenges in the possibility of reunification of the two Koreas from both the military as well as economic perspective. Washington does, however, even to this day, look at the Korean conundrum very much from a military perspective. And ultimately, its objective is for demilitarization and certainly denuclearization of North Korea. But for South Korea, as well as Japan and China to some extent as well, they're also equally concerned about an orderly transition that does not strain the neighboring economies of North Korea. This is particularly true when it comes to South Korea. That there is some kind of safe roadmap for the Korean Peninsula that does not lead to social upheaval, and that does not lead to a mass exodus of people or a great influx of refugees into their own borders. And I think we have a lot to learn from what's going on in Afghanistan at the moment, when there had been a roadmap, but perhaps that roadmap did not have the various scenarios laid out extensively. What we are really looking for at the moment, as we look at the economic future of North Korea, is to ensure that if and when there is a change in regime in Pyongyang, that they are able to integrate themselves into the mainstream global economy. We've already seen glimmers of a willingness for the general population to embrace some of the benefits of the economic order that we have at the moment. I don't want to sound so flippant, but we see, for instance, the adaptation of mobile phones all across Pyongyang at the moment. It's become a very big tool to develop another recent development under Kim Jong-un, which is the development of the non-official, the de facto black market as well. We have much to do in terms of ensuring that the North Koreans are able to rejoin an economic society that is compatible to the majority of the region. There are, not least on the financial sector, there needs to be a great deal of support when it comes to financing and banking, as well as on the trade front. There are a number of issues that can be dealt, including the serious reconsideration of opening up the Kansong industrial complex, amongst other issues. So in a nutshell, there is great urgency, especially looking at how we see the collapse of Afghanistan despite 20 years of US engagement. There is a desperate need for greater coordination now on the potential transition, whatever that transition may be in North Korea, about what we can do as an international community to ensure that there is stability in the Korean Peninsula. And going back to the issue of the Indo-Pacific more broadly and some of the challenges the countries face as we try to maneuver in this new realm of great power competition, we see, as Purnima eloquently outlined, the emergence of new partnerships and new alliances, not least with the Indo-Pacific alliances, but also through the Quad, which is, of course, primarily focused on military coordination between the four major powers of the region. But it's also increasingly become a vehicle for economic coordination as well. We see, for instance, that the Quad had come up after its latest meeting earlier this year about a way to ensure that there is more equitable distribution of vaccines that go beyond the existing COVAX regime. So that at that time was talking about the United States would provide the actual vaccines. India would manufacture these vaccines. Japan would provide a lot of the financing behind it, and Australia would provide a lot of the transport and logistics behind it. That kind of cooperation actually had gained a lot of political support, but of course with the surge in COVID infection rate in India over late spring, early summer this year, that kind of four-party division of labor actually kind of fell to the wayside. But I think there are many opportunities for the Quad to work together for a common goal. But it is important, though, that we continue to think beyond this great power competition, and for the middle powers to actually work more closely together to ensure that their voices are heard and that their values are also reflected. Of course, the United States is focused on, is as much focused on getting its own house in order, and also trying to step up to the plate as it tries to meet the challenge of China on the economic front in particular. China, meanwhile, is endeavoring to win over hearts and minds, less in the rich countries like the G7 or wealthy countries like South Korea or Singapore, but it is really stepping up efforts to court the developing countries across Southeast Asia, as well as Africa and Latin America and Central Asia, which the United States has really fallen by the wayside. For instance, the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, will be in Singapore and Vietnam later this week. We actually saw the Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, in the Indo-Pacific region last month. We had seen the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, also in the region as well. So there is concerted effort by the United States to actually be more present in the Indo-Pacific region, but many argue that it is actually not enough, and perhaps a little bit too late when it comes to timing. And certainly this the struggle that the United States has had in Afghanistan and trying to ensure that its values and its efforts are rewarded in a way that it had planned is actually not moving as planned, has really shaken the confidence not only of Washington, but also the confidence of America's allies and partners across the Indo-Pacific as well. One last point that I do want to make before I turn it over so we can actually get to audience questions. Franco raised a very interesting point about Asian values. And I do think that in addition to this adherence to lifting all boats and investing in economic growth across the board, there is a case to be made about the strength of Asian values today. I think we saw that with the outbreak of COVID. Here in the United States, we have tended to look at how countries deal with the pandemic through the lens of democratic values versus authoritarian rule. That is, but in Asia, the conflict has been seen more as a difference between individualism and collectivism. So in the United States, even now, we grapple with this politicization of vaccination and mask wearing. At the end of the day, saying that whether I choose to wear a mask or get vaccinated, that is my own personal choice. The Asian approach, more broadly, is about collective interest. How can the country, how can the government actually benefit through individuals working together as one for a common goal? And that has led to a lot more of a comprehensive approach to dealing with issues like vaccination and mask wearing as well. I also want to point out that as much as I would like to advocate for closer pan-regional cooperation, especially on the economic front, the pandemic has also made clear that there is a lot of fragility in the global economy, and many of the answers that governments have turned to is doubling down on greater domestic resilience. And what I mean by that is that they are more focused on being self-sufficient and self-reliant. China is the biggest case in point in that respect. They've come up with this concept called dual technology development, so that they are actually, on the one hand, they are trying to export their, continue to export their goods, but at the same time, they are trying to make their own ecosystem of technologies that will make them less dependent on US and Western technologies, and at the same time export their own Chinese-based technologies to emerging markets so that they expand their own sphere of technological influence. This approach, of course, is not unique to China. All countries, democratic or otherwise, are also taking this. The United States too is taking on a much more domestic focused approach to economic growth. So we are seeing this rise of economic nationalism, which does make it more difficult to find ways of cooperation amongst countries. But there are opportunities for cooperation. It may not be through a shared ideology. I believe that we will see greater coordination on a sector by sector basis. I think one of the biggest candidates for that will be in the semiconductor sector, where we know that on the one hand, semiconductors are incredibly important to keep the world literally running. But at the same time, investing in semiconductors, the production, the design, the manufacturing, and the research that goes into high capacity semiconductors is incredibly intense, and there is great benefit for greater coordination amongst countries as well as between private companies as well. So for just to conclude, there is opportunity for greater cooperation. There is a role for public policy to play in ensuring that there is greater multilateral cooperation. But given that we are seeing the surge in economic nationalism and the need for democracies to actually adhere to the concerns of voters, there is going to be a lot of backlash against cooperation. So there needs to be a recognition of those concerns and perhaps identify areas of where such cooperation can occur, and also identify the countries that can be seen as trusted partners and really use that one hook to expand that potential for cooperation even further. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. A lot of content, a lot of things to think about. Good points there with the need for an orderly transition of anything that would develop. And I think that's why we're here, trying to bring together many strands of this effort. I'd like to ask Mrs. Voria if you have anything you'd like to kind of just play off of from what Ms. Goto shared. She brought up a lot of points. Maybe you have some thoughts or perspectives on that. Not to put you on the spot, but and you have to unmute yourself there. But some of this relevant to you too.
Yes, definitely. I was on mute when I was speaking and realized that. I think hats off to Mrs. Goto, wonderfully placed, very relevant points that you bring, that domestically, that resilience has to be there for any country to be able to participate or succeed. Just like United States and India, when discussions with the Quad said that we will be there to support Afghanistan, but Afghanistan has to take a lead in their own peaceful cohabitation within the country. I think she brought a very good point that yes, each country has to take charge and be resilient about what they really want to do and how they want to take charge and move forward with their country's interests, because each country has different interests. We all know that world population, 40% of it is China and India. And India, fortunately, it's 400 to 500 million Indians under the age of 30, whereas China has the older generation that is kind of depleting now. So very different scenarios, but yet they are the two countries that hold 40% of the population. So it's very important to take a look at these two giant countries. Somebody mentioned about innovation capacity in China and India regarding the dragon and the elephant, understanding the development of innovation capacity. And I believe they wanted some comments on that. And those national research committees were talking about competitiveness. Research councils were talking about policies and global affairs. And dragon and the elephant, understanding development of innovation capacity, is related more to technological innovation. China, of course, is taking that over 21st century congresses they had. In technological innovation, India, again, both are getting ahead in the IT, AI, you name it. There is $883 million opportunity in AI alone with India. So you can imagine the global progress is happening fast, and countries are paying very close attention to who's doing what. In the middle of all the Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, I also see India shifting from rupees in many countries and utilizing cryptocurrency. And so I think overall, there will be a big overhaul in every aspect, whether it's business, national security, or how we do business. The financial world is going to have a tremendous change.
Okay, thank you. I have a question actually for you, Ms. Voria. What possibility is there for India and China to work together, or are they fundamentally competitors trying to get a bigger slice of the same pie?
I think one is a democracy and one is a dictatorship. I don't see any real relationship happening, and I'm being very realistic, although I'm a very much of a born optimist. And I do believe that optimism is a faith that leads to achievement. Nothing can be done without hope and confidence. So I do have hope, and I hope these countries are confident to come and sit on the table and communicate like to adults. India has made many efforts, but it becomes the national security when that comes into picture, and China defaulting on every peace agreement that they make. And the next thing you know, next morning again they are bombing on India, or they are taking a little by little the territory that belongs to India, biting at a time. In this case scenario, I have very slim chances is what I see in any significant, meaningful peace talks between the two nations. Although economic development, I think both of them want it badly. But I guess when there is no trust, how do you do business with people? So I'll leave it for viewers to think about it.
Yes.
Food for thought.
Do any of you others have a thought on that particular question? Okay.
Ladies first. Well, I would say that, based on the European experience, there has been tremendous bloodshed over many centuries in Europe, especially between Germany, England, France. And you know that now, to a very large part, these tensions that have existed for centuries have been more or less eased in the last 50, 60 years. And trade has been a main reason for that, one of the main reasons. Of course, they were all fed up with having to see their sons and daughters die on the battlefield for so long. But one thing that's clear is that once supply chains become more and more integrated, when countries in the region have more to do with each other economically, and one can't think the unthinkable when, say, a country like China has extensive relations with Korea or Japan or India because of trade relations. If they engage in conflict, then all these supply chains are also destroyed. And it's extremely costly, not just to the opponent, but to the party that's involved in the conflict. So I can only see that increased collaboration on the economic field will lead to more and more stable and more peaceful relations between each. So yes, the systems of governance are different. India is the largest democracy in the world. China is an authoritarian system, a totalitarian system in the view of many. But they also see that their own survival depends on them having relationships that don't involve conflict. So we should encourage in every way that we can economic collaboration at every level, and this will stabilize the region, in my view.
If I can just
Sure.
add to that. I hate to be a Debbie Downer on this, but the argument about economic linkages and shared economic destiny is not necessarily a reason to, or the often quoted argument is on the eve of World War I, Germany and France had their highest economic integration to date, and yet the network and systems of alliances led to World War I, and we know how that story actually played out. That said, I do want to make 2 points. One is that there has been concerted effort amongst the countries that are democracies in Asia to woo India. It was a great disappointment when India did not join the big regional trade framework, the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. And the United States is not part of this. But Japan and Australia actually tried to make sure that they would continue to engage with India on trade. And one of the ways they did so was to come up with the trilateral supply chain initiative, talking about trilateral cooperation across Asia to ensure that there is stability in the supply chain network and that there is greater information sharing, both at the private as well as public levels. So India is the name Indo-Pacific, right? There was a lot of concern, I believe, in India about India's name actually kind of being thrown in there, because traditionally India has been rather hesitant to align itself with one or the other, but the name itself manifests the fact that there is great importance in making sure that India is part of the strategy that the United States and its allies are trying to pursue. The other point that I do want to make is that China, as I mentioned before, is really trying to court the emerging markets in the developing countries. And one of its biggest ways that it's made headway in the region is really investing in Pakistan. Pakistan had been really a country that the United States and other countries have invested heavily in and not seen much return. China has been really prepared to invest further in Pakistan, and the China-Pakistan economic corridor is really being touted as one of the success stories for China to date as well. And that creates its own tensions between Pakistan and India as well, in addition to all of the pre-existing tensions between the two countries. So on the one hand, there is a lot of wooing of strategic partners in the region, and at the same time, it is actually a very incendiary situation as well.
Thank you very much. I have a question here also for Ms. Goto about journalism. It seems like journalism has changed drastically in many ways. Is advocacy journalism more nationalistic now, becoming less nationalistic? How is that playing into some of the issues we're talking about here with reporting and, on the economic fronts?
Well, how we consume news and how we disseminate news has really changed rapidly over the last decade or so. And certainly the way we consume news is not necessarily through subscribing to one single source of information, but readers can really cherry pick where they get their information from, and also the source of information has changed drastically as well. There is no, the authority of a particular media institution, media organization is not as absolute as it once had been. We are seeing a lot of opinions in particular, not necessarily information, being spread at such a rapid pace that it is difficult to curate. But that said, I think the questioner has a really interesting point to make about whether it is becoming more nationalistic or not, the established media. And I would argue that it's not necessarily more nationalistic, but it is becoming more to taking sides, in that objectivity is not as valued as it once had been. And as a journalist, I know that the stories that I produce get more clicks if it has a point of view. And if the point of view is more extreme, it does get more play. And I say that as someone who had been on the side of as a journalist, but now also as someone who actually does a lot of speaking to the media as well. Opinions that have side with one side or another get attention, rightly or wrongly.
Yes. That leads me to make a good point for, I think on Saturday, we're having a webinar with one of the International Media Association, which strives to address the issue of objectivity and the role of media in advancing cooperation fairly and honestly, and not taking sides that further divide this discussion. I'm trying to phrase a question here for you that, based on the discussion you've had on the regional trading, and we've had a lot of comments about China being, a dominant power and asserting itself. So, do some of these organizations, do they threaten China at all in terms of a counter to some of China's aspirations globally? And could that, and since China is such a key linchpin for anything that would happen in North Korea, is that a leverage point that weighs in favor of, could, and going forward in the future, be in favor of putting pressure on China somehow to, argue for sanctions relief and for North Korea to denuclearize? Hope that made sense, but just those, whether the trading groups, provide some counter to China.
Do you want anyone to speak on that, or?
Ms. Goto, maybe you're most suited here.
Yeah, so there are a number of trade deals that are already in play. We've talked about CPTPP, which the United States is not a partner of. We've talked about RCEP, which the United States is not party to. We've also talked about USMCA, which of course the United States is party to, but we've also seen the United States really dropping the ball when it comes to the European having a trade deal with the EU, with the UK as well. There is a lot of opportunity that the United States has lost. And on the other hand, what does China have? China is part of RCEP. China has showed some interest in joining CPTPP. China is, beyond the trade deals, it is investing heavily in emerging markets. What China really is trying to do at the moment, speaking about media and information, actually it's disinformation, there is a lot of effort on the part of China to divide America's allies and to actually divide the United States from within as well. And it is making a pretty good headway in it. And I think, going back to this example of Afghanistan, because it's just like so in play at the moment, one of the disinformation that China is really trying to do is to say that, okay, the United States has abandoned Afghanistan, its word, it's not its bond, it's going to abandon Taiwan, it's going to abandon Japan, it's going to abandon NATO and all of these other places, therefore America is not trustworthy. And the scary thing, I guess, is that a lot of the disinformation that China is perpetuating is not, there is a kernel of truth to it, and that's why it has such impact, right? But what the United States needs to do is to really push back on that, and push back not simply by its own messaging, but also following up on its words. And there is a window of opportunity for the United States to regain the confidence of its Indo-Pacific partners.
Okay,
but that window is becoming narrower.
Thank you very much. Let's just give another final comment from Purnima and Franco, if you have anything else you'd like to share. And then we appreciate you guys being here for this wonderful discussion.
I think I saw that someone said, wonderful discussion, the State Department would be impressed. I think we could share this with the State Department, because what IAED is doing, it is very important work. And any input from not just the elected officials or the diplomats, I think common people's version may make sense to the State Department in calculating some of the talks that we just had in how to handle with the culture and norms of individual thinking could be helpful to the State Department. So with that, I think somebody mentioned about India and China and the Taliban return leagues, Afghanistan neighbors scrambling to adjust. And I think that will take a lot of time, because countries are worried about influx of all the people rushing out of Kabul and Afghanistan. And it's a serious matter. We can't think about economic security at this point, where people are just even gasping to live. And so a lot of influx of people will be coming to the neighboring countries. Therefore, not much is going to be happening at the present time. Although India did have a good relationship with Afghanistan when it comes to economic security. I would just like to say that let's continue to build on these peace talks. Slowly and steadily, like they say, one drop at a time makes an ocean. And if we continue to stay like a rock in the ocean where negative waves come and subside, I think these talks are like rock. And let's continue to be a solid rock to the entire.
I agree. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Each drop carries some weight on it, for sure. Dr. Famularo, one final short minute.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here with this group of experts, and I'm sure that more people should hear what the ladies had to say about the situation in the Indo-Pacific and how progress can be made toward collaboration on a broader level, which will not only bring peaceful reunification in Korea, but also further stabilize the region, which has many other conflicts that need to be solved. Of course, not all of them have the intense issues that come with nuclear weapons at stake. We know that this exists between India and Pakistan and China. We know that this exists between North Korea and the South, and probably many other areas. that our work is so important to always look for ways to open the channels of collaboration and dialogue. The worst thing that we can do is stop talking and stop collaborating and stop finding ways to trade with each other. So with that, may we continue, and thank you for your good work in IAED and looking at this from an economic perspective, because this is what definitely charges the motors and keeps the engine going in a lot of relationships, is the fact that we do trade with each other. Thank you.
All right, well, that brings us to the end. Thank you so much to our audience as well for your questions. And we have an IAED page which you can sign up for to get our information. But with that, I'm going to say goodbye. And I think there's going to be a short video here for our audience as they depart. Thank you all for presentations.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shihoko. Thank you, Alan. That was excellent coverage.
Hi, I'm sorry to get
Bye for now.